In recent years, the idea of minimalism has become very popular, not only as a philosophy or art direction, but also as a style of everyday life. Minimalism in the interior, striving for a rational wardrobe and making lists of basic things. Minimalism in cooking and the like. The epochs of redundancy and minimalism have been replaced more than once in history. Nowadays, the desire to limit the number of things, conscious consumption arises in contrast to the dominance of the consumer era, which in turn was preceded by an increase in living standards and the opportunity to buy beautiful things in large quantities. The idea of minimalism is a psychological aspect. Since minimalism is largely about a better understanding of oneself, its essence is not only and not so much in self-restraint, but rather in asking questions to oneself. What is really valuable to me, and what is imposed from the outside? What pleases me, and what on the contrary burdens me? By asking yourself these questions, you can come up with certain problems related not only to the handling of things, but also psychological ones. Therefore, in a sense, passing things has a certain psychotherapeutic effect. It's like putting things in order in your head. For example, there may be too many things, not because of their excessive acquisition, but because it is difficult to part with them in a timely manner. There may also be different meanings behind this. Maybe you don't like things, but they were given by someone, and getting rid of them is like offending another person. The predominance of such a motive may indicate an unresolved problem of separation, a desire to sacrifice oneself in order to maintain relationships with others. In another case, there are things that were very successful once, but have long lost their relevance. For example, a prom dress from 20 years ago. It is often difficult to part with things that were hard to get or were expensive. Then it's about the inability to accept loss and the denial that time is passing, the desire to keep everything unchanged. Sometimes, behind the unwillingness to get rid of unnecessary things in a timely manner and acquire new ones, there is fear of the future and self-doubt. The attitude towards the things with which a person surrounds himself to some extent can be considered as a reflection and continuation of his psyche. That is, by the way we acquire things, put them in order, or get rid of them, we can judge what is happening in our inner world and in our relationships with other people. Sometimes we do some manipulations with things, mainly in order to cope with our feelings and thoughts. According to the theory of psychoanalysts, the mental life of a person arises by analogy with the processes of metabolism, absorption and subsequent excretion. A person places useful objects in himself and thus appropriates them, introjection occurs, and pushes them out of himself, placing them in others. All unnecessary is introjection. Excessive anxiety and dissatisfaction leads to failure at one stage or another. If a person suffers hardships or does not feel sufficiently satisfied, oral greed may arise, a gigantic need to absorb, acquire new things, which seems impossible to satisfy, since its source is not material, but a psychological deficit. Minimalism is often contrasted with shopaholism, a type of psychological dependence when the acquisition of new things is necessary to obtain positive emotions. The moment of shopping acts as a manic defense against anxiety and insecurity, giving a person the illusion of power, freedom and control over their own lives. As with any other addiction, a brief episode of joy at a new acquisition then turns into an experience of guilt and remorse. Then a person ceases to be the master of his things. People are forced to spend most of their income on spontaneous purchases, take out loans. Unnecessary things take up all the space. Sometimes the same problem is presented in exactly opposite ways. A typical picture with psychopathologies is extreme chaos and disorder in the house, reflecting internal chaos and the inability to structure one's inner life somehow. Minimalism is associated with the desire to free up living space for what is really important and valuable for a person. However, by itself, reducing the number of things and ordering them does not always bring changes in inner life and automatically gives more freedom. As you know, excessive striving for cleanliness and order often indicates attempts to cope with excessive anxiety and emotional tension. On the other hand, it is possible to afford minimalism only if you feel a sufficient degree of security and stability. For thoughtful purchases, it is important to understand that there are enough resources. Then you do not need to grab the first thing that comes along, because the other may not appear, and you do not need to take care of things that have fallen into disrepair, because there will be no money to buy new ones. The feeling of a lack of resources can be quite objective, or it can reflect internal reality and, for example, be an unconscious expression of the fears of past generations who experienced deprivation, poverty and scarcity. How many things are necessary for happiness and harmony? It is hardly a question of quantity at all. It can be different, not necessarily minimal, because we are all different, with different needs, tastes, hobbies. Ideally, things help to live, bring comfort and joy. If, on the contrary, They enslave, taking up time and living space, and eating away the lion's share of the budget. Then you need to figure out why this is happening, and most likely, put things in order not only in things, but also in your head. About 2,000 years ago, the philosopher Epictetus noticed that people are burdened and belittled because they tend to care about too many things. His way of solving this problem is not to stop caring at all, but to take care of the right things and stop clinging to everything that doesn't matter. According to Epictetus, what matters and does not matter is related to the reality of our place as intelligent beings in an ever-changing environment. Some things are under our control, others are not. If we manage to take care of what is under our control, we will find ourselves in a position of strength. But if we neglect these things and focus on what is not under our control, we find ourselves in a position of weakness. Especially when we cling to something that does not depend on us, we condemn ourselves to a life of suffering. But what are these things that we cling to? And why is it better to let them go? And what we need to focus on in order to be happy and contented, as well as what we should give up. And how do we do it? The two main sources of Epictetus' philosophy are called the Discourses and the Enchiridion, which contain his wise words recorded by his disciple Arion. These ancient texts can teach us many things about achieving a state of contentment and inner peace, as well as how to strengthen our mind against external circumstances that we usually perceive as harmful. In the first chapter of the Discourses, the philosopher makes it clear that external circumstances can harm us only if we allow them, that is, if we cling to them. He gives an example of a link, saying that the link does not prevent him from walking with a smile, being cheerful and serene. However, if he had clung to the idea that exile was a great tragedy, or to his possessions and the people he was separated from, he would have been in agony. Epictetus knew perfectly well that the possibility of being exiled was not our choice, and the possibility of being cheerful and serene was under our control. Therefore, he didn't care about the first and focused on the second. If we focus only on what we can control and let go of everything else, then nothing outside of ourselves can harm us. Some things are in our power, and others are not. The things under our control are opinion, aspiration, desire, disgust. In short, any of our own actions. The things that are not under our control are the body, property, reputation, command, and everything that is not our own actions. Simply put, the outside world is not under our control, but the way we decide to act and position ourselves in relation to the outside world is under our control. Again, Epictetus does not urge us not to take care of anything in front of. He urges us not to cling to things that are not under our control, because these things are fickle, weak, and unreliable. The fascinating outside world of pleasures, sweet but insatiable, we often find interesting enough to engage in them. Therefore, we desire what the world has to offer and cling to everything that pleases the mind and senses. But to lose what we cling to is painful. Unfortunately, what we gain and lose depends on fortune, pure coincidence. Therefore, if we allow our happiness to depend on things that do not depend on us, fortune controls our feelings. Thus, it is imperative that we stop clinging to things that we have no control over if we want to develop a strong and stable sense of well-being. It seems that part of human nature is attachment not only to the people we communicate with, but also to objects. We constantly confuse attachment, which has certain possessive elements in it, with love. We deeply enjoy the presence of the person we love, but we experience agony when he leaves our lives. And even more tragically, we often suffer the loss of someone before that loss has happened, which happens in our imagination. Clinging to someone or something implies constant pain arising from resisting a possible, but ultimately inevitable separation from what we are attached to. In some cases, the fear of loss or abandonment becomes an obsession, which means that our whole life revolves around preventing separation. The same goes for power. The ancient Greek philosopher pointed out that power is insatiable, and that is why gaining power usually leads to a thirst for power. People corrupted by power have been the cause of suffering countless times because they did not want to give up power and wanted more, which only causes stress. But the irony of power is that although it involves control, power itself is not under our control, which means that it can be given and taken at any time. Fighting the impermanent nature of existence is the way of a fool. If we want to live in accordance with nature, as the Stoics do, then we must adapt to transience. You have to treat life like a dinner party. Did they bring you anything? Reach out and take your share moderately. Don't stop. Do not extend your desire to him, but wait until it reaches you. Do this in relation to children, wife, public positions, wealth, and in time you will be a worthy participant in the feasts of the gods. When we can even reject what is offered to us, we will not only be partners at the feasts of the gods, but also their empires. This indicates the need to live in accordance with nature simply as it is, and not in contradiction with it. We need to steel ourselves against the pain of loss by changing your perception of the things we love. Instead of thinking that we own something, or that we have the right to something or be with someone, we could consider everything we have as borrowed. The ancient philosophers' view of things is not far from the truth. Nothing belongs to us except our ability to reason, because if we owned our children, our spouses, our estates, we would not be able to lose them. Thus, the idea that we borrow corresponds better to reality, since there is always a moment of returning someone else's. Clinging to borrowed things is a recipe for pain. Having things and even enjoying them is not a problem if we can give them up at any time.